let's go ahead and get started. Today is our Tuesday, February the 2nd, gardening and landscape Q&A chat. That's David Rodriguez. That's my email address. I'll show it again at the end. Don't hesitate to send us good quality images attached to the email. If you need something to identify, we'll try our best. Good information on the question you're submitting as well, and we'll try to get it answered as best we can there. So if you look at this, you'd like to know who you are and where you're chatting from, please. And you can do multiple questions, but Ruby's the moderator, so to give everyone a fair opportunity, you might say, we'll probably at least get to at least one question that you submit. And this is an opportunity for each month with each season that we're in to kind of see what other people are asking questions about, and I'll try my best to answer them to the best ability. And then it's also an opportunity for everyone to learn together as well. So that's me, David Rodriguez. I get confused real easy, so I don't like to put my face when I'm doing these things, but y'all know who I look like. And I am kneeling down, by the way, there at the beautiful Children's Vegetable Garden Program, which I really, really miss. And I'm sure the volunteers, or particularly our Bexar County Master Gardener volunteers, miss it as well. God willing, we'll get back to being where we need to be. So here we go. So before we start, Ruby, with answering questions, Ruby is very special. I think we have 2 or 3 plants named after Ruby, and I would like to share with y'all before we start. We have a new tomato. Every year we release a Rodeo tomato. Unfortunately, our part of it, the Master Gardener part of it, with the HEB Little Buckaroos on the farm, we're not going to be out there at the Rodeo this year. Rodeo starts here in San Antonio on February the 11th and concludes 18 days later on February the 28th. So the 2021 Rodeo tomato, we go forward like Aggies. We attack and always go forward. Ruby Crush is the Rodeo tomato, folks. And if you go to plantanswers.com, the Bexar County Master Gardener website, and I believe Denise has posted also on the Bexar County Extension website and Facebook page information on this year's Rodeo tomato. So go check it out at your favorite independent nursery. Try it, like we always recommend trying this. Since a lot of kids are being homeschooled and doing online classes at home, you know, what better way to get them involved in the gardening experience by growing this grape-like tomato, Ruby Crush. And information on starting them out early are archived on plantanswers.com and the other outlets that we have. So you know what the independent nurseries are locally, folks. Millburgers Landscape Nursery, Fanix Garden Center, the 2 Rainbow Gardens, the Garden Center, the Plant House, and places like that. So take care of these guys, and we'll go ahead and go forward and start answering some questions today, Ruby.
Great. Thank you, David. This is just a reminder that we are recording, and to please leave your mics muted and your video off. This will just help to alleviate any sort of interruptions during the presentation. Okay, so our first question is from Caroline, and she asks, she says, I have a climbing Bouganvilla in San Antonio. It was just planted by a landscaper in April 2020. Do I take off the green ties around the stems to get it to climb to my arch?
Yes. So this is a good question, not only for her bougainvillea that her landscaper planted in April, but anytime that you purchase a plant that has support on it, be a stake, a bamboo stake, or a big tree with a larger stake, really look at it as this way. Often these are crutches, okay? So crutches meaning when we put them out in our landscape, we do want to really consider removing them immediately, because what happens is often we forget about them. And if we forget about them as a crutch, often when the plant starts growing and getting more established, then it might be, having issues with circulation or girdling the plant. So yes, do remove it as best as you can and carefully. Remember, bougainvillas are tropical-like plants. Now, when we talk about shade trees, often when you purchase a shade tree, or sometimes even fruit trees and other plants, often these guy or stakes that they have, um, a lot of these plants are so top heavy, they're overgrown. So that's a lesson learned, not only removing them, but also purchasing a plant that's well balanced. We always look at the top, and that's very important. Look at the top, a green, healthy plant, but we also have to look at the root system. Old nurserymen used to pop out these um, plants out of the containers and examine the roots. Do they have a lot of white fibrous roots? Show the healthiness of the plant. But also, is a plant in balance like a scale? You have to have a good defined root system, a good amount of root system. So you don't want an overly grown plant with a small root system. So yes, do remove that material, and sometimes even plant tags. We want to know what we planted, the cultivated variety, but often if we leave these plant tags down the line, they can also impede the growth or grow into the stem of the plant as well. So look at that as well. Good question.
Great. Thank you, David. The next question comes from Kim, and she asks, can I plant my spring garden directly into the compost that I get from the city for free?
Yeah, I wouldn't go that route because remember you said the key word free. So not knowing if it's the material and the consistency of that material, I would not go that route at all. So what I would do, just like in a either if you go in an appropriate size container that drains well, I would use that compost. I would use probably no more than 20% of that compost with a premium peat base potting mix, not potting soil, 80-20 mix. Lace that with copious amounts of a slow release container approved fertilizer such as Osmocote 18612 plus. If you do traditional raised beds, then do the same thing. Every major vegetable planting, both in the spring and fall, you want to incorporate with the native or existing garden or landscape mix that you blended in originally, um, with this 20% mix every major season, but lace those traditional ground plantings with 3 to 5 pounds of a slow release premium 1959 fertilizer at a rate of about 100 square feet, 2 to 3 pounds per 100 square feet. And remember, the compost is not fertilizer. It's a soil amendment. So you really need to accelerate your plants with the nutrition that we just talked about. But I would not use straight compost. Blend that in with the native soil or existing soil that you brought in the past.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question comes from Alexandra. She says that recently weeds blew in and started growing in between rocks in her driveway, and she wants to know what can I do to keep the weeds from growing in the driveway.
Well, couple considerations. If you're trying to minimize seedlings or new plants, warm season weeds that are just around the corner for springtime from coming up that have not come up as of yet, particularly if it's a driveway situation, is keep that driveway clean. Remember, where there's organic material deposited over time in gravel and driveways and things like that, particularly aggregate areas, not organic mulch, but aggregate, gravel and walkways, driveways, etc. So try to keep it clean, sweep it out, blow it out occasionally. That will help, particularly in gravel areas that have um, big, large gravel areas. Blow it out a couple times a year. The other consideration is use a Roundup or glyphosate type product. Use a weed and grass killer. That's the only one that I would use on adult weeds that come out. Adult weeds that come out, always read and follow label instructions. These products are safe if we use them correctly. It's not the product that's bad, it's us not using them correctly. So use that for the adult weeds that they sneak in, but minimize the baby seeds from taking hold by keeping the area swept and blow down occasionally.
Great. Thank you, David. The next question comes from Todd Phillips from San Antonio, Texas. He asks, can Blackfoot daisy and dwarf Katy ruellia that has gotten stocky be cut back to have more foliage? And if so, how?
Yeah. So not only those two plants, the ruellia, the Mexican petunia, and Blackfoot daisy, the good rule of thumb for these hardy type, perennial type plants is mid-February to March 1st. So we've been piddling our thumbs, trying to get ready to do stuff. So when those days you don't have nothing else to do, make sure your hand pruners or your loppers or your head shears, all three of those or so, are sharpened. We always keep them sharp, just like when you're going to cut the turkey Thanksgiving dinner, and you want to make sure your knife is sharp at all times. So sharp, sharp, sharp. Oil them down if need be as well. And so mid-February to March 1st. So the rule of thumb for these types of plants, perennials in general, is to follow the 1/3 removal. So you want to remember pruning is a dwarfing and rejuvenation process. So we want to remove no more than about a third, maybe 20% to about a third. And before you make those cuts, kind of measure it. You know, Sister Judith showed you how to use a yardstick in first grade. So measure it. So if I take 1/3 off, do I have leaves under that? So you have to have leaves, you know, if it still has leaves overall. Okay, just don't have those sticks there. Now, there's certain plants like Mexican firebush, Mexican bird of paradise that are 100% sticks. And those plants from mid-February to early March, you cut those to the ground or to at least the greenwood. But y'all see these plants like Gold Star Esperanza, the best Texas superstar Esperanza plant, July and August, 10 feet tall because people didn't cut these perennials down in mid-February to early March. So yeah, do cut them back and then fertilize them. Fertilize all your established ground cover and perennial beds early March, the same time you do this pruning. Put that 1959 premium lawn food out, the same that you use in the vegetable garden that we just talked about. And most important, the same fertilizer you use for your spring lawn in mid-April. So do fertilize them. And then around May, replenish that organic mulch around them. I like a couple months so the soil warms up these plants coming out of winter dormancy, you might say, to accelerate that growth on them. So about May, before you go into the desert of the summertime, put a fresh layer, a couple inches or so, of a double shredded hardwood mulch with compost, what we refer to as a living mulch. So that will really get them started for this spring.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. Our next question comes from Melinda. She wants to know how to prune blackberries and how much should she be pruning her blackberries.
Yes, blackberries are an awesome plant, and I consider blackberries an earth kind fruit crop. And the bush type blackberries, which tend to be thorny, You have the old brazos, which is a small blackberry, very tart, but the newer ones, which are my favorite, would be and the best performing ones for most of the state is one called Kiowa, and the other one's called Roseboro. Kiowa and Roseboro. Okay, so all the nurseries have them at this time. So blackberries, the new growth that comes out in the springtime is the growth that's going to produce the flowers and fruit next year. So whatever new growth comes out this year is going to flower and set fruit next year. So when those straight upright new shoots come out this spring, when they hit about 3 feet tall, cut them in half. Cut them in half with your sharp hand pruners or head shears. Okay. And that's going to encourage thicker canes and more lateral branching on those canes. So we have a bush or a thicket. Okay. Now, last year's growth is going to flower and set fruit this spring. So when we wear our long sleeve shirts and our gloves and hopefully don't get bit by the thorns, being in the rose family, we're going to enjoy all those blackberries. Remember, they're blackberries, not raspberries that are red. They have to have a nice sheen to them, good luster color to them before you harvest them, and kind of on the soft side. When those are finished up, what you do after that is you focus on new growth for next year, and you remove the fruiting growth that finished up this year. So you have to do some work on. Remember, it's in the rose family, just like roses. You have to do occasional pruning and cleaning up on them here and there. But they're low input overall, good plants. Everyone should be growing blackberries. So follow those. And remember, all these fruit and edible crops, we have more in-depth information that you should study up on the Aggie Horticulture website under the fruit trees section.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question comes from Nancy here in San Antonio. And she said that she has a 25-year-old hollies near the corner of the house on the southwest side. And they seem to be struggling this year. The limbs are dying off. And she's wondering if there needs to be some sort of mineral supplementation. She's read inside of 1604 near I-10.
Okay, so a couple of suggestions that I would do is take a good sample of a regular limb and a limb that looks bad into Milberger's Landscape Nursery on 1604 in Boulevardy. Ask for trace and let them look at it. That's one thing. The second thing is, here's my email address. So there's many types of holly, so we need to identify which species it is. So it's lived a long time. Okay. So send us a good picture of the overall plant, the leaves, and the problems. Good quality images attached to the email, not part of the email, and history about the plant. What you do with it every year, what you do when you prune it, when you fertilize, how much water, that way we can help. But the bottom line is, remember, the first reaction we have is when a plant is stressed from drought, over or under watering, neglect, planted too deep, excess soil mulch on the crown, compact soils, poor nutrition program, using the wrong products at the wrong time, an insect, a disease, other. The first reaction we have is what? What you just asked there, folks, is to fertilize. And that is the worst thing we can do when a plant is under stress, is to fertilize it. Okay? Because we need to, first of all, kind of identify what the problem is. But the biggest thing is, everybody wants to fertilize stressed plants, lawns, trees, shrubs, fruit, vegetables, everything. But that is the worst thing you can do, is to give it nutrition until we find out what caused the problem or what is causing the problem, What can we do to relieve? And fertilizing is last on the totem pole, you might say. But let's try to find out what it is, the type of holly, why it's doing this. And remember, the key word is 25 plus years old, right? It might be on the decline of just simply it's tired and it's moving on, right? It might need to be replaced.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question comes from Kim. She says, I planted a satsuma a few years ago and it was loaded with fruit the last few years and has grown with droopy branches. When can she fix it or prune it? And if she buys another satsuma, how can she avoid this in the future?
Okay, so when you have, well, there's a few things involved there. Satsuma mandarin oranges, which are Texas superstar plants. The best ones would be Miho and Sito, and then the newer introductions from Dr. Moy from the San Antonio Botanical Garden would be orange and Arctic frost. Okay, so all citrus should be grown as big bushes, big bushes. Okay, first of all, and we have more information on growing both patio and landscape citrus on the My Extension 210 YouTube channel. I think we have an hour archived webinar there. That is your homework assignment, by the way, and our other listeners, if you want to learn more about patio and landscape citrus, a good video there. So we grow them as big bushes. We only do pruning or training on citrus or removal of dead wood when new growth pushes out for the springtime. So we should do very little minimum pruning on citrus, maybe a light trim here and there. We always keep the rootstock, which is at the graft point, the aggressive rootstock trimmed out, which are usually straight upright growth with big sharp thorns to them. Those are removed, but very little pruning on them or training. Now, if they have that weeping effect, that usually tells me that we're growing them in an area that's not getting full. Let me say one more time, full sun or ample air circulation. We're not fertilizing them correctly and other. So do please visit that patio and landscape webinar for other information on the My Extension 210 YouTube channel. And then as a rule of thumb, not only for citrus, but all fruit trees, once you look like you have a good crop setting, pomegranates, any type, peach, plum, citrus, etc., that they're marbled to golf ball size, a good rule of thumb is we need to thin out, and y'all ain't going to do this, so I don't know why I mentioned this, but you need to remove excess fruit. 1 to 2 fruit per fruiting stem every 6 inches is a good rule of thumb. If you overcrop these trees, they tend to be stressed, and then you have what we refer to often alternate bearing. That means you get a bumper crop this year, but unfortunately next year you'll have very few fruit. So follow that guideline and do check out that webinar as well.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question comes from Larry from Houston, and he is asking about nematodes. He typically has nematodes on cucumber and okra roots. He has like a 69% sand, and according to a A&M soil test. And he wants to know, why are nematodes worse in sandy soil than in clay soil, which is what he has in Houston over there?
Yeah, the root knot nematode, which is basically the bad nematode, you tend to see it in sandier soil, but you can see them in any type of soil, clay and other. But they can move a little bit quicker in sandier soils because the aggregate size of the soil particle, and they move on a film of water. So It just depends. It just really depends, and that's another thing that we can also, when you buy these garden and landscape mixes, the key on that is the organic matter that's been properly aged and decomposed. And knowledge as a consumer that we don't really like a lot of sand blended in these mixes, particularly if we have heavy clay soils. And as a consumer, you need to educate these guys that you want to make sure that that they deep dig in these pits. If they get any pasteurized topsoil out or sand, if they just scrape the top, or um, they don't go deep in these pits, then often they're bringing in weeds, or what we're saying, this root knot nematode issue. So it's a big problem. We have in-depth information on plantanswers.com. And celebrity tomato, when it was first recognized by Dr. Parsons here in San Antonio, which he's the one that released it as a national tomato All-American selection, and has nematode resistance. So a lot of tomatoes and plants that you buy have resistance to nematodes. So how do we kind of alleviate that problem long term? Well, the key is building the organic material of the soil, both in sand and in clay. So every major spring and fall planting, it goes back to what we talked about earlier today, is incorporate 20% finished high grade compost with the native soil that's there. Work it in, work it in, work it in. And then with the heat time, start mulching with a good local source mulch. Here in San Antonio, we like the double shredded hardwood mulch with compost, a living mulch. We don't incorporate that into the soil, but we use it as a top and move it out when we do planting. So that's one thing. Build up the organic material in the soil. Try to get variety of plants, particularly tomatoes that have nematode resistance. And then Dr. Parsons has a real good article on plantanswers.com. So around October, late October, you can do a cereal rye. It used to be Elbon rye, but a cereal rye. Use it as a green manure crop during the winter time. That helps build the organic matter of the soil. It deep plows into the roots, into the soil profile for air and gas exchange, but it also acts as a trap crop in the winter time that will get that population down quite a bit for that root knot nematode. If you sacrifice some of the area in the springtime, if you sacrifice some of the area in the springtime, then you would plant major plantings of the Tagetes marigold, the old-fashioned, old little blooming French marigolds, and what that does, their root system excretes an enzyme in the soil that really gets the root knot nematode population down over time. You're not going to be able to grow a lot of crops, either of those two options, during that warm season, cool season, specific time frames, but at least you'll build up the soil over time. But there's no true chemical or product that you can use that's effective on the root knot nematode issue.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question comes from Priscilla. She said that she made her own seed starter out of peat moss, vermiculite, and perlite, and she wants to know at what point does she add any type of garden soil or fertilizer?
Well, it's a seed starter blend, so hopefully the pH is in balance. I would have probably used some real finished pre-moistened milled peat moss on there as well. That's what the premier growers use. Um, you can incorporate a little bit slow release container fertilizer in that blend, or wait till you separate the seedlings in their individual containers, and then use a slow release container fertilizer like Osmocote Triple 14 or 18612. Then immediately start using a water soluble fertilizer on the leaf stage of the plants, minimum every 4 to 7 days. A good water soluble, but when we say water soluble fertilizers, You don't like to eat the same lunch, breakfast, and dinner every day. So plants are the same way. Have three in your arsenal. Maybe liquid hosta grow, maybe triple 20, maybe miracle grow, etc. And alternate that when you fertilize these types of plants or supplement plants in your home vegetable garden and or patio.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question comes from Sharon from Fort Worth. She wants to know, when is the best time to plant Asian maple seeds?
Okay, she's in Fort Worth, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so maples and elms are in the same family, and maples have a unique seed pod. They call it a samara. And with samaras, they're winged. So they have a little seed on the left, they have a little seed on the right. And then when they come off the tree, they kind of go like a whirly bird in the air and then hit the ground. And maybe the birds or animals will eat them, or if they get both stratified by the cool weather or temperatures of summertime, or scarified by nicking the seed, then if they might germinate. So what you need to do is collect quality plumpy seeds on those samaras. So you have one seed to the left and one seed to the right. Extract them if they have not split open yet, and put them on some pre-moistened. Um, uh, I would try two things: pre-moistened perlite, and just kind of put them on the top, and then do one on pre-moistened perlite, very fine vermiculite, and very fine pre-moistened milled peat moss that's mixed up already, and then just put it on the pre-moistened and just lightly tamp it in with your fingers, and then put a little bit of vermiculite on the top of that, put them on a heat mat, and see if they germinate. See if they germinate, because they're hard to germinate maple seeds. Okay. Um, Otherwise, what I would do is contact the folks at Love Creek Apple Orchard. Love Creek Apple Orchard. And the owner that started Love Creek Apple Orchard west of San Antonio, Mr. Bexar Adams, was the guy that the brainchild of our Texas apple industry, which is very small, but that he did quite a bit on that. He's done passed away, but see if you can talk to the new owner out there. But he did a lot of work with the Uvalde bigtooth maple, and maybe they can share some other techniques in getting that seed to germinate.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question comes from George. He says that he has three fragrant roses. The fragrance is strong, and he loves the fragrance. But on the leaves, he gets fungus right away, and the rose petals fall off within 2 days. Is there any way that he can stop this?
Yeah, that's the thing about roses. It's all related on the variety of the rose. Of course, the ones that are the best cut flowers and smell beautiful, you're gonna have to put high inputs into them. So that means they need to be planted correctly. They need full sun. They need to be pruned, and they need to be sprayed. They need to be sprayed. So what you're describing is a fungus, and it's most likely a disease called rose black spot. So that means you got to keep them sprayed prophylactically once a week. Now, since he's in San Antonio, and you other listeners, if you go to the San Antonio San Antonio Rose Society website, they sell a very cool. Well, they have a lot of information on there, but they sell a little handbook of how to grow roses. And these folks grow the best of the best roses. And I missed the shows with this COVID mess. But order that book. It's very, very, very low price book. And it'll give you a lot of information how to grow roses, the do's and the don'ts. But most important, you need to spray them. So read up on spraying. prophylactically with fungicides, and sometimes you have to spray insecticides for aphids and thrips and things like that as well.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question is from Julie in North Texas. She wants to establish buffalo grass in a small section of her yard that she's killed off a lot of the Bermuda grass and other warm season grasses. With the winter or the cooler season grasses outcompete the buffalo grass
Yes.
in the spring? And in other words, do I need to kill off the winter grass or can she leave it?
Yeah, honestly, I don't really even recommend buffalo grass for most homeowners because you already said what you're going to have. Um, Weeds take over. Okay, so buffalo grass is not a conventional turf grass as we would grow St. Augustine selections, zoysia selections, or a Bermuda selection. So that's one thing, and I leave this for the highway department and large commercial sites, to be honest, because most home gardener sites that I've seen, they're frustrated. They're big time frustrated, and or they don't realize that it's somewhat nice and green, but it's contaminated with Bermuda, winter grass in the wintertime, or other weed species. So if you can live with that, fine. But I don't really recommend buffalo grass for most home gardeners because of the weed issues. So the key here is you have to 100% kill out any green vegetation, weeds, and other before you consider planting sod or direct seeding out there when it's warm enough, okay, which is hard to get a good stand. The second of all, you need to scrape up, till up that soil and treat any fallow weeds that come up 30 days later. So people think these types of things are a cure-all and simple to do, but if you're trying to get a stand established, you have to do it correctly. But often down the line, there's no really herbicides once you have a stand of buffalo grass. Well, I hate to use buffalo grass, say grass, but buffalo going. There's really not approved herbicides that you can use once weeds get in there. So you make the call.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question comes from Margaret from San Antonio. She wants to know if you could repeat about pruning esperanzas in February, and the other question she has is how long can lemons remain on a tree?
Okay, we'll do one question because I already forgot the first one. So Esperanza, the only Esperanza we want to plant, and remember, Esperanza's hope. That's what hope is. Esperanza, we need hope. So Gold Star is the only one y'all need to be growing, folks, which is a Texas Superstar plant. When you purchase these, you make sure they're in full bloom, small little plants in full bloom, big yellow, beautiful flowers. Thus, it's a Texas Superstar plant. And you make sure that it's Gold Star, okay? Like we mentioned, all perennial type plants, a good rule of thumb for the central South Texas area and most of the state is from mid-February to early March. You cut them back a minimum of 1/3 to the greenwood or where they froze down potentially. Of course, use sharp pruners and things like that. You fertilize them and then you replenish the organic mulch around the month of May before you go into the summer months. Use a double shredded hardwood mulch with compost, which we refer to as a living mulch. And then what was the second question? I'm sorry, Ruby.
The second question was how long can lemons stay on a tree?
Oh, you can leave citrus, lemons, or others on the tree as long as you can before the tree decides to abort them or a bird or an animal get to them. The longer you can leave a citrus on the tree, typically the sweeter they get. But most citrus, we usually try to bring them in before it gets super cold, and we usually finish up by Christmas. Thus, we call a lot of the Christmas oranges, the satsuma mandarin oranges, Christmas oranges, but most other citrus we want to pull out by January, because what's happened if we keep it any longer than January, we have potential cold spells, which might freeze the fruit on the tree. And the longer we keep the fruit on the tree, it still has the mindset. If a plant has a mind to it, that I'm still in a fruit mode, and then it doesn't change the clock, you might say, to go into growth and flower mode, which most citrus blooms usually late January, February, March. So pull them off if they haven't been pulled off yet.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question comes from Darcy in San Antonio. She asks, she says she has a soggy area in the garden, and what would be happy planted there? It's soggy and shady.
Soggy and shady. Okay, a couple of considerations to look at is umbrella grass. Umbrella grass. I like the dwarf umbrella grass. It grows about 4 feet. So it is considered a sage, but it's not like a bad sedge like nut sedge or purple or yellow nut sedge. It stays kind of in its place. But look for dwarf umbrella grass. Start talking to your nurseries now. It's a cyperus selection, but you don't want the tall one. You want the small one, okay? And they probably won't have inventory till about May or June at the nurseries, but start asking them now at this time. The other would be cannas, or what we say cayoles, cannas. And cannas, there's a lot of selections of cannas, not only for the cool blooms, but for the unique foliage. And a lot of them have that red tinge to them as well. But if it's shade, you're not going to get too many blooms off of them, okay? If you want more blooms, they really need at least half a day or at least 6 hours of intense sunlight. So they can go in wet feet. Another one, the more sun, the more blooms. So they can grow in a kind of a shady area and super dry or super wet or wet feet. If you can look for it, again, start sourcing it. It's more of a summer perennial. Is your pink potato bush, your potato bush. Look for those right now. Those are pretty awesome. Or they're usually available in the summertime. And then Mexican petunias, both the dwarf and the upright standard ones would do well in there as well. So there's some considerations to look at. Oh, I'm sorry. I said potato bush. It's bush morning glory. I'm sorry. Bush morning glory.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question i- is comes from someone who's asking about pomegranate trees. They say that they have two different pomegranate trees. One is 7 and one is 5 years old. And unfortunately, they have not been able to harvest any fruit from either one. The fruit usually starts out great, but then it turns brown and splits. Do you have any?
Yeah, that could be a lot of different things. The standard pomegranate that you see at the produce section at your favorite grocery store is wonderful. They're beautiful in size and color, and those come out of California. California does a wonderful job growing wonderful pomegranates. It used to be for years and years that that's all that was sold on this market, and most of those trees simply don't perform well here. So if you have a wonderful selection, that's most likely the issue. So on Aggie, on the fruit tree section of Aggie Horticulture, uh, we have a lot of information on pomegranates, and there's a lot of newer selections. So look at these nurseries, independent nurseries, and try some of these newer selections. So it's probably a selection thing. The other thing is probably how it's trained and how it's pruned. Like a tomato, a big fruited tomato, pomegranates are the same way. You need to prune them and train them correctly and grow them and fertilize them and mulch them correctly. Because if you don't do that and the fruit is exposed to the sun, they get sunburned real bad. So that's another issue. Sun scald. Another challenge would be just overall maintenance, which you can read more about it on that publication on Aggie Horticulture on the fruit tree side. So there's a lot of things. If we have up and down weather, and y'all seen the weather we're having so far, you have your heater on in the morning, you have your air conditioner on by 2. It's dry. It's a monsoon. We have lack of sunny days, high humidity, so forth, so forth. It's called weather, folks. And these commercial guys have to spray, and you have to use fungicides almost prophylactically. If you don't use fungicides, you're going to be prone to possible rots inside the fruit and on the outside. So all those which we just mentioned, plus insects like leaf-footed stink bugs, could be issues here. So you just gotta be an investigated person and try to follow the guidelines to minimize this from occurring. You have to put inputs, pruning, spraying, and etc. on these crops. It's very very hard just to stick a tree in the ground and throw the dice and have a crop that comes in high quality. But I bet you don't have. I bet you have wonderful as well. So look at these newer varieties too.
Okay, thank you, David. We had actually several other questions about pomegranates, asking about
Okay, good.
insects and trimming and stuff, but I think you covered it for these other
Well, let's talk
questions.
about trimming pomegranates
Okay, yeah.
since you brought that up.
Mhm.
So I think one of the key on pomegranates and fruit trees, peaches, and other is proper pruning and training. That way, you have ample sunlight, air circulation in and around the plant, and that will help with the disease, minimize disease pressure and quality fruit. So, a couple things. You need to thin out fruit on all your fruiting trees, pomegranate, citrus, and other. So once they hit marble to golf ball size, we need to go in there and thin fruit out if it's overcropped. That's one fruit every 6 inches, no more than 2 fruit per fruiting stem. Boom, that's one thing. Okay, if you don't do that, you're gonna have more disease and insect pressure. Okay. The other thing you're gonna have is you need to train pomegranates as you do multi-trunk crepe myrtles, multi-trunk mountain laurels, Yopon holly, etc. So pomegranates, you need to have about 5 major limbs, north, south, west, east, 5 major limbs. Off of those individual limbs, from the ground up, you skirt them up 18 inches. So anything growing off those major 5 limbs, remove it. They tend to water sprout. They tend to sucker quite a bit as well. Okay. That means you have to go in throughout the year and remove those water sprouts and suckers occasionally. Pomegranates are often planted too deep. So make sure any excess soil or mulch when you do initially plant them is plant about an inch higher than grade. That will help minimize that. So that's a little bit more on pomegranates. Next question, please.
Great, thank you, David. The next question comes from Catherine, and she wants to know, when do you trim crepe myrtles?
Okay, remember, we do not promote being a crepe murderer. Okay, so we need to get that out of our mindset, and we see that right now all over town. People are topping these trees. People are topping these trees, and we don't do that. Okay, so they're dormant right now. So you could do some selective pruning here and there to open up the canopy, to skirt them up, similar to what we talked about with the pomegranate just a second ago, but we never top them. So you can do that at this time when they're completely dormant. When they leaf out, if you have any dead wood in the here or there, you can remove that as well. But we never top or promote crepe murdering. Okay, and y'all see this around town. That's a no-no. It's a no-no. We don't do that. Okay.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question comes from Lou, and he asks, when and how far back should I cut salvias?
All the salvias, most of them are the perennials. Mystic Spire salvia is the top-notch Texas superstar perennial. So if you don't have that in your cut flower butterfly garden, you need to add that this spring. Mystic Spires, a blue salvia. But again, that goes into the other perennials that we've talked about: Gold Star, Esperanza, and a few other perennials. So mid-February, early March, cut it back about a third at the most, or to the greenwood. Fertilize it, replenish that organic mulch in May, and again coming out of the summer heat in early September with that double shredded hardwood mulch with compost.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Brenda um, in Bella Vista, Arkansas, and she wants to know, how do you get rid of fungus gnats on houseplants?
Fungus gnats and houseplants, Arkansas. Okay, so don't overwater your houseplants. Keep your houseplants nice and healthy. Try to be consistent as possible on the temperatures, both the AC and heater. Um, but the thing is, do not overwater. When you pot up your plants into larger containers, or if it's a big mess right now, you might take it out of the container, remove a lot of that potting mix, and then use a fresh growers peat based potting mix. Don't you be using cheap potting soils. And when you do water, you let the plants dry out between each watering, thoroughly water all the way around the container till it sufficiently drains from the bottom. Don't tease it. Give it a good drink when it's time. Do not let water stagnate in the saucer. Keep the leaves of your houseplants clean. So dust them off as you would do furniture every so often. Rotate them so they get light here and there. And then put them on a starving diet. You need to feed them, but don't over fertilize them. Use a slow release fertilizer like the Osmocote 18612 formulation twice a year. And then if it continues with these gnats, then you would get some mosquito bits or mosquito dunks, break them up in a gallon of rainwater, not tap water, rainwater, break them up, drench the potting media, and that should take care of the baby larvae in the potting mix.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question. Oh, well, first, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you have a question, if you could please type it in the chat box. Again, if you are on a phone, if you just tap the bottom of the phone, the icon will come up with the little chat, and then you can click on the chat icon, and the chat box will open, and there you can type your question. If you're on a computer, just move the mouse and you should see the bottom part of the screen come up, and you'll see an icon. It's going to say like participants, chat, things like that. And so you click on chat, and then there you can type in your question. So I did see there was a few people that raised their hand, and so just letting you know, if you do have a question, to please type it into the chat box. Okay, so our next question comes from Cindy, and she says that she has a sweet olive that is over 10 feet tall and 4 feet wide. And next to it is a cedar elm that is starting to cover up the olive tree. Now, she prefers the sweet olive over the cedar elm, but she wants to know, is it okay to shorten the branches of the cedar elm that is touching the sweet olive?
Um, Probably no, because cedar elms don't like to be cut on. So if you're going to do some selective pruning, be very, very gentle with that cedar elm tree, or some people call it fall elm, or leave it as is, because cedar elms don't like that much pruning. I've seen many cedar elms overly pruned and they kill the tree. So if you do very, very little pruning and selective pruning, you might get a certified arborist like from Bartlett out there to do that for you, because if you don't do cedar elms right, you can kill them pretty quickly. And sweet olive, osmanthus fragrance, uh, is one of my favorite plants. And it's an old-fashioned plant, and they bloom usually right in January, right now. And that fragrance that it has is unbelievable. So I'm glad you're growing it. And if you folks want an unusual bush-like fragrant plant in a microclimate, because it is a little bit cold sensitive, uh, do add sweet olive to your home landscape.
Okay, thank you, David. It looks like we're at 12:55. We're just 5 minutes to one. So you let me know when it is the last question. We do have several questions still in the chat box. Um, the
Okay.
next the next question comes from Melinda in Driftwood, and she wants to know about fire ants invading her raised bed and container vegetable gardens. How to safely combat the fire ants.
Well, yeah, fire ants are always an issue, and we got to be careful. So, your landscape, and your lawn, you want to use a proper treatments on those to minimize them, like growth inhibitors or growth hormones, like a bait throughout the years to minimize them from coming in to the vegetable garden, because on edible crops it's something else. So work with your Texas certified nursery professional on those products. But for the vegetable garden, if you see a mound, drench it immediately with some fresh liquid spinosad or spinosad, which is safe to use in organic vegetable farming. And you can use it as a drench. It works very, very effective on them. And then in your outskirts of your landscape, use appropriate baits and other fire ant killers. We always read and follow label instructions, as well as the timing and the amount that we apply out there, as not to over apply it as well.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question comes from Casey from San Benito, Texas, and she says that she seems to be struggling to have big, healthy, full-producing plants. That she puts them directly in the ground. She says that she's following instructions on light, water, heat, but they seem to be small and aren't really producing. And she's wondering, could it be the pH, or does she need to add a different type of soil? She's using the organic bag soil mix with native soil right now.
Well, down in San Benito, down in Cameron County, you have Jennifer, who's in my place here in San Antonio and down in the valley. So we need to really, really know what kind of plant it is, and maybe she can help you a little bit more. But we need to know what plant it is. But one thing I'll tell you about plants in general, we got to make sure they're properly acclimated. So, we try to say fall is for planting and maybe winter and spring where it's appropriate. If we plant plants that say they belong in full sun and they're grown in a greenhouse condition or in a shady condition, and they're not properly and amply acclimated into that full sun, they can decline very rapidly. The other thing is species adaptation. So, does it really belong where it needs to be there? Is it properly acclimated? Is it being fertilized and watered correctly? Watering is the hardest thing to teach people, and more plants are killed because they overwater. So, talk to Jennifer or send me an email with some pictures and more of the information, and we can help you the best we can.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next question is there a way to minimize oak tree roots coming up in the yard or beds under the tree?
Yeah, we get this question multiple times. So that's live oaks that typically shoot out. So I call those scouts. So if you go into the indigenous populations of the hill country and areas like that, You call them escarpments, and what you see is a mont of trees. And normally they look all uniform in size and little soldiers. And normally those are roots coming off a superior mother tree. So those scouts are out there looking for water, survivability, et cetera, et cetera. So I think some of the best things to minimize this is to reduce the compactness of the soil, particularly if you have heavy clay soils in your lawn. You core aerate your lawn in early March and you apply a lawn dressing, a premium lawn dressing. That's going to help air circulation, gas exchange in the soil profile. The second thing is look at the crown of the tree, making sure that the flare roots are exposed and are open. Often these trees are planted too deep. Remember, these soldiers, these scouts are out there for survivability because mother tree is stressed. Do not use weed and feed fertilizers, and fertilize at the right time of the year with the right products at the right rates. Reduce stress. Mulch your flower beds with the appropriate mulch for your part of the state. Central and South Texas, we like a double shredded hardwood mulch. When you water, particularly during droughty times, deep water the best you can. And just mow them and mow them often, but every time you cut them, they're going to resprout. If we can minimize the turf grass and keep it real thick, and grow the right variety in the right location, the shade will minimize the shoots. If you have a flower bed, the mulch or a good thick ground cover will minimize the shoots. But there's really no true spray that's out there that will minimize them from coming up without potentially hurting the mother tree. Check with Mark or Mike Fanick at Fanick's Garden Center. They have a product for shoots. I don't think it lists live oak trees, but if you want to inquire about that product, I know some of those sprout shoot things we use in commercial fruit orchards, but you might want to look at that product and see if you want to use it. But again, remember we always have to read and follow label instructions. That's the law of the land. But I've heard some people using these sprout suckers and shoot stopper and things like that. But again, you use it if you think you want to try it.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question um, is comes from Talit, and she says that she has a 7-year-old satsuma tree in the ground, and unfortunately, a few other trees around it have begun to shade it out. And is there anything that she can do to promote flowering and fruiting, or would you suggest digging it up and moving it?
Yeah, that tree and fruit trees and many of your warm season vegetables, tomato, pepper, other. The key is full sun, full sun, good soil drainage, proper maintenance throughout the year, and excellent ample air circulation. So, there's no magic fertilizer that's going to make it produce more if you like sunlight. The only thing is maybe do selective pruning on the plant material that's near there to let more sunlight in, possibly, and or air circulation. Get a certified arborist out there, like from Bartlett, or a good arborist like that can help you with that. But she knows what the answer is. It's the sunlight. But there's no super magic wand chemical fertilizer, super thrive or something like that, that's going to make it produce better quantity or quality fruit on it. It's the lack of sunlight and air circulation. Ruby, we'll do one more question, okay?
Okay, I'm gonna ask this question because we have several questions about ball moss. They want to know, should they remove ball moss from the trees? It's on crepe myrtles, and they know that it's not hurting the tree, but should they just let it fall off, or what should they do about the ball moss?
Yeah, first of all, before we answer our last question, we want to thank everyone for participating today. If you didn't get your emails answered, your questions answered today, send me an email. We'll get it answered as soon as we can. Remember, send me quality images attached to the email and a real precise, brief email, not 10 pages, please. And then we want to all thank Ruby Zavala because it's a lot of work putting on these webinars and taping them and archiving them. So thank you, Ruby, and all y'all. Do that little applause with your little thing on your chat for Ruby. So thank you, Ruby. So ball moss is not a parasite like mistletoe. Okay. It's an epiphytic type plant that's attached to a plant. You even see it on utility lines. Okay. So it does not suck the energy out of the plant. And I'm a real strong believer that ball moss is secondary for the overall health of the plant. I really think so. And we've mentioned numerous times today good plant health, meaning is your plant in the right location, full sun, excellent air circulation? Has it been trained and pruned correctly? Is it mulch? Is it fertilized with the right products at the right time of the year? Is the flare root exposed on the tree? Are you minimizing compacted soil? Are you applying mulch? Everything we've talked about, and not applying wrong products, i.e. weed and feed and others. So I think ball moss comes about because of that, of stress. And if you really examine and study ball moss, you see it typically underneath the canopy of trees that has dead wood or dying wood. Okay, because of these factors I've mentioned numerous times in today's gardening chat. So ignore it. Or better yet, let's get the tree, the plant where it needs to be. Good plant health. Okay, ignore it. Pull it off, physically pull it off. Or usually around early April, you get a certified arborist out there to use a product that will help make it fall off the tree. I think it used to be the old Coastside formulation, but nowadays it's called Supro 5000. But don't spray it. Get a person that knows what they're doing with the skill level and the right equipment, and they spray the tree. And then it takes about 6 months for it to dry, desiccate on the tree, and then eventually fall off. Some people will hire a tree crew to go in there and hand pick it off. But the key on ball moss, folks, is good health. We always go to the doctor. Oh, my back hurts, my thing hurts, I'm overweight, etc., etc. But we want the silver bullet. We want the magic pill. Plants are the same way, just like us. We should be taking care of ourselves all the time to minimize such issues from happening. I hope everyone learned a little bit today. A lot of great discussion with a lot of subject matter. Give Ruby about a week or so to archive this on the My Extension 210 YouTube channel. We have a lot of cool things, but these are free that we've been doing, folks. And all I ask is when you go to that My Extension 210 YouTube channel, subscribe to it and help us get the word out on it as well. Don't forget to listen to Mr. Bill Rody and I this Saturday on the 1200 a.m. Lawn and Garden Show. Mr. Rody and I, who's my radio mentor, have been doing this for 15 years. Bill turns 80 this year, and hopefully he'll stay with me for many more years to come. And this is like doing the Saturday gardening show, but we don't have all these commercial breaks that pay for the show. But thank y'all. Hope y'all learned a little bit, and always learn and have fun. Happy gardening, everyone.